What? Ma'am, you need to stop resisting and get on the ground.
Resisting? I'm standing still with my hands visible.
You're being belligerent. Get down now.
Officer, I am a sitting federal judge.
You are making a serious
I don't care
error.
who you think you are.
On the ground. Now.
The body camera is already recording. Late afternoon settles over a quiet residential street in Michigan. The sun hangs low enough to cast long shadows across driveways and front lawns. But there is nothing dramatic about the scene. No flashing lights, no raised voices, no sense of urgency. A patrol car slows as it turns the corner and comes to a stop near a single-family home with a neatly trimmed yard. The camera activates as the driver's door opens. In the driveway stands a woman beside a dark sedan. The driver's door is still open. The engine is off. Keys rest loosely in her right hand. A work bag sits on the passenger seat, half visible through the open door. She is standing upright, facing the house, her body language relaxed, her posture unguarded. The officer steps out and speaks in a tone that suggests routine rather than alarm. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle." The woman turns her head slightly, surprised more than alarmed. She does not move toward the car. She does not reach inside it. She remains where she is and looks directly at the officer. "On what basis?" she asks. The question is calm, measured, almost professional. At that moment, the officer has no idea who he is speaking to. He has no understanding of the professional background of the woman in front of him, nor any appreciation for the fact that the words he is about to choose will later be dissected and attached to a settlement that will cost the city $875,000. Her name is Angela Brooks. She is 46 years old. For more than 20 years, she has worked in compliance and regulatory oversight, most recently as a senior auditor for a regional healthcare network. Her career has been built around identifying procedural failures, documenting deviations, and explaining, often in writing, why rules exist and what happens when they are ignored. She is not confrontational by nature. She is methodical. She has no criminal record, no pending cases, no history of complaints against her. Her previous encounters with law enforcement are limited to routine traffic stops, none of which resulted in citations. She owns the home she is standing in front of. Her name is on the deed. Her property taxes are paid in full. She returned from work less than 3 minutes earlier. At 5:42 p.m., Angela turned into her driveway, parked her car, shut off the engine, and opened the driver's door. She reached back inside to retrieve her work bag, a habit formed from years of carrying documents and laptops back and forth from the office. That was the extent of her activity before the patrol car arrived. No one else was present. No object was being removed from the vehicle other than her own belongings. This was not a crime scene. It did not become one until authority was applied without explanation. Less than a minute before the officer arrived, a call had come in to dispatch. The report was brief and a suspicious individual had been observed in a driveway. A woman, possibly someone who did not belong there. There was no allegation of trespass, no report of theft, no claim that a crime was in progress. The caller did not provide a name. No description of suspicious behavior beyond presence. The officer acknowledged the call and responded. When he approached Angela, his posture changed. His shoulders squared. His stance widened slightly. One hand rested near his belt as he positioned himself at an angle that placed the open car door within his peripheral vision. His eyes moved briefly from Angela to the interior of the vehicle and then back to her face. "Step away from the vehicle," he repeated. Angela did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She asked a second question. "Am I being detained?" The officer did not answer. Instead, he gestured toward the sidewalk bordering the driveway. "I need you to step over here." "On what basis?" Angela asked again. "What crime am I suspected of?" The body camera captures a pause. The officer exhales. It is subtle, but audible. "You're being uncooperative," he says. The distinction between uncooperative behavior and lawful assertion of rights is clear under constitutional standards. A person who asks questions, who seeks clarification, who declines to comply with commands unsupported by legal justification, is not obstructing. At this point, no crime has been articulated, no reasonable suspicion has been stated. Angela remains still. Her hands are visible, her tone does not change. "Am I free to go?" "CI-6. The officer looks past her, briefly scanning the house, the yard, the neighboring properties. The camera records the silence that follows. When he speaks again, the tone is shifted. It is firmer now, edged with irritation. "I need to see some identification." Angela tilts her head slightly, considering her response. "Am I legally required to provide ID right now?" The officer takes a step closer. The distance between them "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he says. This is the point where the encounter turns. The request for identification is no longer tied to an articulated investigation. It becomes a measure of compliance, a test of authority. Angela's questions, which have been calm and precise, are now framed as resistance. She responds without sarcasm, without hostility. She explains that she is on her own property and has not been informed of any law she has violated. She repeats the question that has gone unanswered since the encounter began. What crime? The officer responds with a phrase that appears frequently in body camera footage across the country. You're acting suspicious. Suspicion without explanation is not a legal standard. The camera records the contradiction clearly. Angela's behavior remains unchanged. She stands in her driveway, keys in hand, her work bag still in the car, surrounded by her own property. A second patrol car pulls up and stops nearby. The arrival is not prompted by any escalation on Angela's part. No threat has been identified. No resistance has occurred. The presence of another officer shifts the dynamic regardless. The request for identification becomes a demand. Angela opens her work bag and removes a slim folder. Inside is a laminated badge identifying her employer and a document listing her name and address as the registered homeowner. She holds them out, her movements slow and deliberate. The officer glances briefly at the documents, then hands them back without comment. At that moment, a neighbor steps outside his house across the street. He recognizes Angela immediately. He says her name aloud and confirms that she lives there. His voice is captured clearly by the body camera. The information does not alter the course of events. The officer straightens, his jaw tightens. He tells Angela that she is now being detained for further investigation. When she asks again what crime justifies the detention, the response is procedural rather than legal. For officer safety, the handcuffs come next. They are applied without resistance. Angela does not pull away. She does not raise her voice. She does not ask the neighbor to intervene. Her hands move behind her back slowly, deliberately, as instructed. The sound of the cuffs closing is sharp and unmistakable. The neighbor across the street falls silent. The second officer looks on but does not speak. Angela asks one more question. What am I being detained for? There is no immediate answer. The officer guides her toward the patrol car, opens the rear door, and instructs her to sit. She complies. The door closes. The camera records the brief pause before the officer speaks again. You're being detained pending investigation. The investigation of what remains unclear. Inside the patrol car, Angela sits upright, hands cuffed behind her back, eyes forward. The camera angle shifts slightly as the officer returns to the driver's seat. The neighborhood remains quiet. A lawn sprinkler turns on somewhere down the street. No crowd gathers. No emergency unfolds. This is not chaos. It is procedure applied without foundation. The patrol car remains parked for several minutes. The officers speak quietly outside, partially out of range of the microphone. The words suspicious, refused, and uncooperative are audible. But no crime is named. No statute is referenced. No probable cause is articulated. Eventually, the vehicle pulls away. At the station, the tone changes. The environment is fluorescent and quiet, stripped of the authority that comes with a uniform and a street presence. Angela is escorted inside, uncuffed, and asked to wait. She sits on a bench, still holding her work bag. The process slows. Paperwork begins. Names are entered. Timestamps recorded. A supervising officer reviews the incident report and requests to see the body camera footage. The questions begin with neutral curiosity. What was the original call? What behavior prompted the dissension? What crime was suspected? The answers are vague. They circle back to suspicious behavior and failure to comply. When asked what law required compliance under those circumstances, the response is softened. The supervisor pauses the video at several points, rewinds and watches again. Angela is asked a few questions of her own. Where she lives, where she works, why she did not immediately step away from the vehicle. She answers calmly, precisely, and without accusation. After nearly 2 hours, she is told she is free to leave. No charges are filed. No citation is issued. No explanation is given beyond a generic statement about a misunderstanding. She walks out of the station the same way she walked into her driveway earlier that evening. Calm/composed. Documenting the experience in her mind. But the video remains. Over the following days, Angela requests copies of the body camera footage. She files a formal complaint with the department. The language is restrained, factual, chronological. Each interaction is noted, each unanswered question is listed. An internal review is open. The department's own policy manual is cited repeatedly. Officers are required to articulate reasonable suspicion prior to detention. Requests for identification must be legally justified. Presence in a driveway, without more, does not meet that standard. The phrases used on scene are compared against constitutional benchmarks established through decades of case law. The footage is difficult to reinterpret. There is no resistance, no flight, no threatening behavior. The escalation is not driven by risk. It is driven by refusal to submit to unexplained authority. As the review continues, patterns emerge. Similar complaints, similar language, similar outcomes that never progressed beyond internal files because no recording existed to contradict the official report. Angela's attorney files a civil rights lawsuit under federal law. The claims are specific: unlawful detention, false arrest, racial profiling. The body camera footage is attached as the central exhibit. The city responds cautiously. Motions are filed. Statements are issued. There is no public admission of wrongdoing. The defense emphasizes officer discretion, split-second decision-making, community safety, but the timeline undermines those arguments. Nothing happened quickly. Every decision unfolded slowly, deliberately, with opportunities to stop. Depositions are taken. The officer is asked to explain, under oath, what crime he believed Angela had committed. The answers mirror those captured on video: vague, circular, procedural rather than legal. The city's risk management office reviews the case. The footage, the policy violations, the likelihood of a jury watching the same calm questions asked repeatedly without answer. The cost-to-benefit analysis becomes unavoidable. The case does not go to trial. $875,000. That is the settlement approved by the city council. No admission of liability, no apology, but mandatory retraining for the department. Revised guidelines for responding to suspicious person calls, a directive emphasizing the requirement to articulate legal grounds before detention. The officer remains employed. His record reflects counseling and additional training. No termination. No suspension. The video is released publicly months later. It does not go viral immediately. There is no dramatic soundtrack, no shouting, no physical struggle. Just a sequence of questions unanswered, followed by handcuffs. Attorneys watch it closely. Civil rights groups reference it quietly. Oversight committees cite it in reports. It becomes a teaching example in training sessions, stripped of names and faces, reduced to decisions and consequences. Angela returns to her life. Her routine resumes. She parks in her driveway again. She opens her car door. She retrieves her work bag. The street looks the same, but the interaction has changed something fundamental. Her case is not unique. What distinguishes it is not the severity of the abuse, but the clarity of the record. There is no ambiguity about tone or behavior. There is no chaos to obscure responsibility. The system responds not to outrage, but to evidence. Without the camera, the narrative would have been different. A report written after the fact. A claim of known compliance. An incident closed quietly. With the camera, the system is forced to act, and that leaves only the questions that follow every case like this. Was the settlement enough? Should the officer have been removed from the street sooner? And how many similar encounters end without footage at all? Those questions linger long after the paperwork is filed and the money changes hands. In the months following the settlement, the department issues a brief internal memo. It reiterates existing standards rather than announcing new ones. Officers are reminded to articulate reasonable suspicion. Supervisors are instructed to review body camera footage more closely. The language is careful, designed to signal responsiveness without conceding systemic failure. On paper, the system has responded. In practice, very little changes. The call category that started the encounter remains in use. Suspicious person, it continues to appear in dispatch logs, broad enough to justify a response and vague enough to carry assumptions without accountability. The responsibility to interpret it still rests with the individual officer on scene. The training sessions that follow Angela's case are procedural. Officers watch edited clips of the footage. The emphasis is placed on phrasing, on documenting decisions more clearly, on avoiding words that create legal exposure. There is less discussion about why the interaction escalated at all. Angela is invited to attend one of the community oversight meetings months later. Se declines, not out of bitterness, but because the case, to her, is already complete. The questions that mattered were asked on camera. The answers were absent. The outcome followed logically. In private conversations, city officials described the settlement as unfortunate but necessary, a cost of doing business, an expense absorbed into the annual budget. It does not result in budget cuts to the department. It does not affect promotions. It becomes a line item. $875,000 is significant, but it is not existential. What lingers is the footage itself. In law schools and training academies, the video was used to illustrate how quickly a lawful encounter can become unlawful without any dramatic trigger. There is no sudden movement, no raised voice, no threat, just a refusal to answer a basic question, on what basis? The phrase appears again and again in transcripts, not as provocation, but as a diagnostic tool. Each time it is ignored, the officer moves further from legal ground. Each unanswered question compounds the error. The case demonstrates something uncomfortable, that constitutional violations do not require malice. They require momentum. A decision made early, left unexamined, defended out of pride rather than principle. Angela's race is never mentioned on the body camera. It does not need to be. The assumptions operate quietly beneath the surface. Who belongs? Who belongs? Who needs to explain themselves? Who is expected to comply without question? The department's public statement emphasizes that the incident does not reflect the values of the force, that it was an isolated misunderstanding, that training will address it. But the internal data tells a more complicated story. Complaints involving vague suspicion, detentions without charges, encounters that end without arrest but leave no record beyond an officer's narrative, patterns that only become visible when a camera captures the full exchange. Angela's case forces attention because it leaves no room for interpretation. The facts are fixed. The timeline is precise. The escalation is traceable. It begins with a simple order. Step away from the vehicle. An order unsupported by explanation, an order that transforms a routine moment into a legal event. Once issued, it must be justified. When it is not, every step that follows becomes harder to defend. The officer had opportunities to disengage after the first question. After the neighbor's confirmation, after reviewing the documents, each moment offered an off-ramp. None were taken. By the time the handcuffs were applied, the outcome was already inevitable. Not because Angela resisted, but because authority, once challenged, was defended for its own sake. The settlement closes the case legally. It does not resolve the underlying tension. Angela does not seek publicity. She does not give interviews. She does not become an advocate. She returns to her work, where policy violations are identified, documented, and corrected through established processes. In that sense, her response mirrors the expectation placed on law enforcement itself. Follow procedure. Document decisions. Correct errors before they compound. The difference is that in this case, correction only came after the costs became undeniable. $875,000. A figure approved unanimously, discussed briefly, and absorbed quietly. For the city, the case becomes a lesson in risk management. For the department, a reminder about language and documentation. For Angela, confirmation of something she already knew. That rights exist only when asserted, and that assertion, without proof, is rarely enough. The body camera made the difference. It did not change what happened. It preserved it. Without interpretation, without embellishment, without noise. Just a driveway, a questi, and a system forced to respond because the record would not allow it to look away. What accountability truly looks like remains unresolved. Is it financial? Is it disciplinary? Is it cultural? The case answers none of those definitively. It answers only one thing with certainty. When authority is exercised without basis, the consequences may come later. But when they do, they are precise, measurable, and difficult to deny. And that leaves the final question hanging, not as accusation, but as fact. How many similar encounters end differently simply because no one was recording?